My friend, have you ever felt the chill of contempt, the bitterness of being ignored? Have you believed for a moment that your worth depended on the gaze of others? If you allow a stranger's indifference to shake the foundation of your spirit, then your peace is at the mercy of everyone. The good news is that there is a path to unshakable serenity, a lesson that, if ignored today, could cost you your peace for the rest of your life. In the whirlwind of modern times, where approval is measured, in clicks and voices are lost in the noise, the silence of an unanswered notification or disinterest in a meeting becomes small poisons for the soul. Have you ever felt anxiety take over just because someone didn't notice you? This is the illusion the world imposes. The truth is that other people's attention is the most fragile of castles, built on shifting sand. The real danger isn't being ignored, but rather allowing the ego to react with resentment and neediness. The price of giving in to this pain is transforming someone else's silence into the noise of your own unhappiness. The solution to this isn't what you expect, but it's the only one that truly matters. If this reflection has already touched your spirit, like and subscribe to walk with me on this journey of strength and virtue. Now let's move on to what really matters. There's a silent, almost imperceptible moment when indifference cuts deeper than any offensive word. It's when you speak and no one responds. When you send a message and it remains marked only with a viewed checkmark. When you share an idea and see eyes turn away as if you weren't even there, it's in that moment that something inside us screams, "I don't matter." This scream isn't heard in the air. It echoes within, and if we're not careful, it begins to shape us. In today's world, being ignored doesn't just happen on the streets or in meetings, it happens in the palm of our hands. A cold screen that doesn't blink back, a group chat that leaves you out, a post that receives silence while others accumulate likes. This scenario seems banal, but for the approval-hungry mind, it's a slow torture. You don't want to admit it, but each lack of response seems to confirm that you're invisible. The worst thing isn't the act of being ignored, but the narrative we build around it. We begin to interpret silence as rejection, as proof that we are less than, as a silent judgment against our existence. And from then on, every detail becomes confirmation of what we fear. They don't respond to your message, they don't care, they don't look at you when you speak, you're not worthy of attention. This is how the poison spreads. Maybe you felt this at work when you offer an idea and it's ignored, until someone else repeats it and receives applause. Or in your family, when you share good news and they change the subject as if you hadn't said anything. Or among friends, when you organize something and realize their absence was no coincidence. The pain doesn't come just from the action, it comes from the meaning you give it. Being ignored is like knocking on a door and feeling like no one will open it. You start to wonder if you're in the wrong house, if your voice is too quiet, or worse, if you shouldn't have knocked. This constant questioning is exhausting, and the more we seek answers, the more the silence seems to grow, because expectation is like fuel for frustration. The longer you wait, the more you burn out. Sometimes indifference is intentional, a power play, a passive-aggressive message, an attempt to put you in your place. Other times, it has nothing to do with you. The person is distracted, overwhelmed, or simply didn't see it. But the mind, when wounded, doesn't accept nuances. It always chooses the version that hurts the most. And it's in this unconscious choice that we imprison ourselves. The Stoic, however, begins by observing. Before reacting, he acknowledges what's happening. He doesn't pretend it doesn't hurt. But he also doesn't surrender the pain for others to control. He knows that the first battle is internal, understanding that the feeling of invisibility is real, but that it doesn't dictate his value. This recognition is the foundation. Today, I want you to recall a specific situation where you were ignored, and for a moment, feel the weight of that moment again, not to torture yourself, but to identify the wound clearly. Without naming the pain, you cannot heal it. Look at it like a general surveys the field before battle, with attention, strategy, and the certainty that, however difficult, there is a path to silent victory. Being ignored is like walking into a room full of people and realizing no one turns to look. It's the feeling of speaking into a muted microphone, of reaching out and feeling the hand never come. This emptiness isn't just the absence of the other person, but the echo of our own mind trying to fill the silence with assumptions, often the most painful ones possible. And it's at this moment that corrosive doubts arise. Did I do something wrong? Am I not interesting enough? Could it be that deep down, they prefer I wasn't here? Each of these questions, if fed, becomes a weight that weighs down the shoulders and weakens the spirit. The problem is that when we feel this indifference, our first reaction is to chase lost validation. We try to make ourselves noticed, change our tone of voice, say something more eye-catching, force a laugh. It's like lighting fireworks in the hope that someone, somewhere will look up. But the price is high. Every desperate effort to be seen is a small concession of our own dignity. We become dependent on external gaze to confirm what we should know internally, that we already have value, regardless of being noticed. And the modern world, with its incessant cycle of notifications and superficial interactions, intensifies this addiction to attention. Today, being present often boils down to being digitally acknowledged. A red heart on the screen, a quick comment, a reaction, and when that doesn't come, the brain sets off alarms. You've been forgotten. It's an almost chemical reaction, like withdrawal. But the Stoic sees the trap behind it. He understands that the game is designed to make you constantly seek something you can't control, and therefore something that can't sustain your peace. I remember a young entrepreneur once approaching me saying he was discouraged because his friends weren't supporting the business he'd started. No one shared his posts, few asked about his progress, and when he did talk about his ideas, the conversation quickly changed course. He asked me, "What should I do to get noticed?" And my answer was simple: nothing. Keep building, and let the weight of your work be your voice. Because the truth is, those who need to shout to be seen have already lost the battle against their own pride. What truly hurts us is not the silence itself, but the story we tell. From it, we transform absence into rejection, and rejection into proof that we are worthless. But what if we changed our interpretation? What if, instead of "they don't notice me," we thought, "I now have the opportunity to do something without needing applause"? This shift in perspective is like turning a switch. Silence ceases to be a verdict and becomes a fertile ground for proving to ourselves that we can act out of conviction, not applause. The ego, however, does not accept this exchange easily. It wants to be seen, remembered, applauded. It wants every action to be recognized because it believes this is what gives meaning to our existence. But the Stoic knows that life should not be lived in the theater of others' approval. The stage on which we must perform is internal, and the audience is one, our own conscience. It is to this that we must present our actions, and from it must come the only applause that truly matters. You may notice that when you stop seeking attention, something curious happens. Either the world starts to come closer, intrigued by your independence, or it stays distant, and in this case, you discover you didn't need it to move forward. Both situations are victories, because in neither case do you become a hostage to external validation. It's as if, by stopping chasing looks, you free up energy to move toward your own goals, without detours, without unnecessary burden. So before reacting to someone's indifference, ask yourself, if no one ever noticed me again, would I still act the same way? If the answer is yes, you've already won. If it's no, it's time to rebuild the foundation of your motivation. Because the Stoic doesn't act to be seen, but because acting correctly is in itself its reward. When you internalize this, the pain of being ignored dissolves like mist in the sun. There's also the silent aspect of self-punishment. When we're ignored, it's not uncommon for us to start blaming ourselves for something that may not even have happened. We sift through every word spoken, every gesture, every expression, trying to find a flaw that justifies the other person's distancing. This process, besides being exhausting, is dangerous, because when we can't find answers, our minds invent the most cruel ones possible, fueling a cycle of insecurity and devaluation. It's as if, to make sense of someone else's silence, we create a narrative in which we're always the one to blame. In other cases, the immediate reaction to indifference is resentment. We also begin to ignore, treat others coldly, and create barriers to avoid exposing ourselves again. This stance, although it may seem defensive, is actually an emotional prison. The Stoic knows that living in reaction to the behavior of others is like walking with chains attached to our ankles. Each step is limited by the weight we carry outside. And if there's one thing we cannot allow, it's for our actions to be enslaved by the attitudes of others. How many times, out of wounded pride, have we decided to prove our worth to those who have ignored us? We change our behavior, do things against our nature, just to win a look of approval. And when that look finally arrives, we realize it didn't bring real satisfaction, just temporary relief, which soon gives way to the need for another dose of attention. This is the most subtle trap, believing that being seen is the same as being valued. Recognition is something we all appreciate, but we can't control it. When it becomes the basis of our self-esteem, we're always at the mercy of external factors. And here comes the first practical lesson. Ask yourself, if what you're doing today would survive a complete absence of applause. If your answer is no, perhaps it's time to rebuild your reason for acting, because those who live to be noticed lose themselves in the attempt to please. An example of this is those who dedicate themselves to their work with passion, but find their ideas repeatedly ignored. Some give up, believing that nothing they do has value. Others, however, continue producing with the same dedication, even if no one recognizes them at the time. And often, these are the ones who reap the rewards in the future, not because they sought attention, but because they sought excellence. This is the attitude that the Stoic cultivates, doing the right thing for the intrinsic value of the action, not for the immediate return. Being ignored can also be an invitation to self-discovery. Perhaps the indifference we feel today reflects something we've neglected within ourselves. Sometimes we demand attention, but we don't pay attention to what truly matters in our lives. We complain that others don't listen to us, but we ourselves don't listen to our own inner voice. The external silence in this case may be a reflection of the internal silence we've ignored for too long. When we approach the situation this way, it ceases to be just a wound and becomes a training ground. Each time we are ignored, we have the chance to practice patience, resilience, and detachment. And no virtue flourishes without repetition. Just as the body needs constant effort to strengthen, the mind needs moments of discomfort to become unshakable. The Stoic doesn't shy away from training. He seeks it out, even if it hurts. And finally, acknowledging the wound doesn't mean accepting it as a sentence. It means seeing what's real, and then deciding what to do with it. Other people's silence doesn't have to be your inner silence. You can speak less, yes, but act more. You can withdraw from certain conversations, not out of resentment, but to preserve your energy. You can choose not to explain yourself, not to justify yourself, not to beg to be seen. Because a person who knows and respects themselves already has the largest possible audience, their own conscience. There are times when indifference strikes like an unexpected blow, coming from the person we least expect. It's the longtime friend who stops responding to your messages without explanation. It's the colleague who suddenly starts treating you as if you were invisible. It's the family member who seems to no longer care about your presence. These episodes hurt not only because of the act itself, but because of the silent rupture of the bond we believed to be strong. It's as if a bridge that was always there was removed overnight, and you wake up on the wrong side of the river, not knowing how to get back. The impact of this silence is amplified when our lives are already overloaded. In moments of insecurity, stress, or loneliness, being ignored isn't just an inconvenience, it's a cruel reminder that we may be alone on this journey. And this realization, even if momentary, can distort our self-perception. What was once confidence becomes doubt. What was once clarity becomes fog. That's why in these moments, mental discipline becomes vital. What we don't realize is that by reacting desperately to regain attention, we end up validating the behavior of those who ignore us. When we chase after them, we give others the power to decide our worth. It's as if we're handing over the keys to our inner peace to someone who isn't always willing to care for it. This is the first lesson the Stoic internalizes. Attention is a gift, not a right, and therefore cannot be the basis of our identity. Perhaps to some, this may sound like coldness, but the truth is, it's not about hardening your heart, but about protecting it. It's not about closing your doors to the world, but about making it clear that your peace of mind doesn't depend on how often others knock on those doors. It's about understanding that the silence of others doesn't need to echo like noise within you. This is the art of remaining whole, even when eyes pass over you as if you were just part of the landscape. When we can look at a situation without the fog of ego, we realize that often what hurts isn't the fact that we're ignored, but what it awakens within us. Sometimes it brings up old fears, deep insecurities, memories of other times when we felt small, and that's where the overreaction finds room to grow. The Stoic recognizes this dynamic and, upon recognizing it, refuses to fuel the fire with more emotional fuel. An example of this can be seen in figures who, even at the height of their prominence, were often the target of indifference. People who received no credit for their ideas, leaders who were underestimated for their calmness, workers who saw their contributions go unnoticed, and yet they remained steadfast because they knew the value of their actions lay not in the immediate applause, but in the lasting impact they would leave. This is the lesson we need to bring into our own lives. Being ignored, when viewed through the right lens, can become a natural filter for our relationships. Those who truly value your presence don't need constant reminders of your existence. Those who care will spare no effort to maintain contact. Indifference, therefore, can be the silent test that reveals who walks by your side out of convenience and who out of genuine appreciation. Knowing this saves us from many misplaced emotional investments. Ultimately, acknowledging the wound is taking the first step to preventing it from becoming a deep cut. It's not about denying the pain or pretending it doesn't affect us, but about observing it like a doctor observes a wound, attentively, without panic, and with the clarity that healing depends on how we care for it. This is the conclusion of the first chapter, understanding that indifference exists, that it can hurt, but that before reacting, we need to understand it firsthand to know how to confront it. To understand why indifference affects us so much, we need to look within, to the silent mechanism that governs our reactions. We are social beings by nature, shaped to seek belonging since the beginning of time. In ancient times, being excluded from a group meant a real risk to survival. This instinct engraved in our biology still lives within us. Thus, when someone ignores us, even in a modern and safe context, our brain interprets it as a threat. The emotional reaction we feel today is an echo of this ancient fear. But in Stoicism, we learn that we are not obligated to obey the impulses we inherit. Just because an emotion arises doesn't mean it should dictate our actions. The problem isn't the initial feeling of discomfort, but the narrative we create around it. If we interpret another person's silence as proof that we are worthless, we become prisoners of that interpretation. The Stoic, instead, observes the thought, identifies its origin, and questions it. The root of the pain of indifference is strongly linked to our ego. The ego craves recognition, constantly confirming that it is special, indispensable, and central to the world of others. When this confirmation doesn't come, it reacts like a disgruntled child, with anger, hurt, or anxiety. What we forget is that this inner child needs discipline, not more attention. Feeding the ego to soothe discomfort is like giving candy to a child in the middle of a tantrum. It works for a few minutes, but the problem returns even worse. Another factor that intensifies this pain is expectation. We enter interactions expecting reciprocity, response, validation. When these expectations aren't met, we suffer not because of what actually happened, but because the ideal scenario we imagined didn't materialize. It's like preparing a banquet expecting guests only to discover at the appointed time that no one has arrived. The Stoic learns to separate action and result. He does what is right without tying his peace to the outcome. A useful metaphor here is that of burning coal. Holding resentment for someone else's indifference is like holding a burning coal, hoping to burn the hand of the person who ignored us. In the end, the only one burned is us. As long as we remain focused on the other, we will continue to feed a pain that only exists because we give it space. The solution is to release the coal, even if the initial impulse is to hold it tighter. There's also the influence of comparisons. In a hyper-connected world, it's easy to see who gets attention, praise, and applause, and even easier to compare this to our own silence. We forget that each person is at a different point in life, with different support networks and unique circumstances. By measuring our worth by the yardstick of others, we condemn ourselves to a game we'll never win. The Stoic, by contrast, is measured only by their own principles and progress. It's worth remembering that indifference often isn't even personal. People are caught up in their own worries, anxieties, and distractions. The silence we feel can be the result of inattention, fatigue, or even fear. When we automatically interpret it as rejection, we're reacting to a scenario that may not even exist. This is where self-control comes in, resisting the urge to assume the worst. Ultimately, understanding the root of discomfort in the face of indifference means accepting that part of our struggle is not against others, but against ourselves. It's a clash between what we expect and what we truly control. The Stoic knows that victory begins by recognizing this limit. When you understand that other people's attention has never been under your control, silence ceases to be an enemy and becomes a neutral ground where you can choose how to act. Another crucial point in understanding why indifference hurts us is realizing how our identity is often built on the gaze of others. From an early age, we learn to see ourselves through the reflection of the reactions we receive. The approving smile, the compliment, the public recognition. This creates a subtle dependence. We only feel valid when someone confirms our worth. When this confirmation doesn't come, it's as if part of our identity is suspended in the air. Without support, the Stoic recognizes this trap and decides to rebuild its foundation on something immutable, virtue itself. Furthermore, there's a matter of mental habit. When we become accustomed to seeking attention, we begin to interpret it as a vital sign. Silence, then, is seen as a threat. It's like a musician who, after years of playing to packed audiences, finds himself facing an empty room. The lack of applause seems to invalidate the music, even if it still has the same beauty. The Stoic, however, plays not for the audience, but for the integrity of the melody. Another element that strengthens the root of this discomfort is the desire for control. We want to control how others perceive us, how they react, what they think. But no matter how much we adjust our actions and words, the final reaction will never be ours. The moment we accept this, some of the weight of indifference falls away. It's like letting go of a rope we were pulling alone, in a struggle that existed only in our minds. There's also the role of emotional memory. When someone ignores us, our minds instantly connect with past experiences of rejection. It could be something that happened in childhood, adolescence, or even recently, but it left deep scars. Therefore, the weight of the current situation is often amplified by old pains that have not yet been resolved. The Stoic recognizes this overlapping wounds and avoids treating the present moment as a tribunal for the past. Understanding the root cause, therefore, requires us to be attentive observers of our own thoughts. Ask, what exactly bothered me? Was it the person's action or the story I told about that action? This distinction is essential because it gives us back control. If the problem is the narrative, we can rewrite it. If it's the action, we can choose the best response, and often that response will be balanced silence. It's also important to recognize that indifference, when viewed from the right angle, can be a gift in disguise. It forces us to stop and ask ourselves, what am I really seeking? Approval or purpose? Often, discomfort reveals that we've been diverting our energy into maintaining appearances or pleasing others, rather than cultivating our true essence. This awakening can be painful, but it's liberating. The ego, however, doesn't give in easily. It will try to convince you that you need to prove your worth to those who have ignored you. It will suggest small gestures of ostentation, indirect responses, and attention-grabbing comments. Each time we give in, we reinforce the idea that our importance depends on the eyes of others. The Stoic breaks this cycle by remembering that their task is not to be noticed, but to be fair, upright, and disciplined. By understanding this root, we realize that indifference isn't necessarily a personal attack. Often, it's just a natural phenomenon of life, like a shadow that moves as the light changes. The question isn't, why did they ignore me? But, what can I learn about myself in this silence? This shift in focus is what transforms the wound into training, and training into inner strength. Indifference also affects us because, deep down, it touches on one of the greatest human fears, that of being insignificant. When we realize that our words, efforts, or presence have no apparent impact, it's as if the very meaning of existence is questioned. This feeling is dangerous because, if left unchecked, it can lead us to seek meaning from the wrong sources, trying to please everyone, compromising principles, or overextending ourselves to deserve attention. The Stoic, understanding this, deliberately chooses to find meaning in the act of living virtuously, not in the amount of applause they receive. Another aspect to consider is that indifference can often stem from misunderstandings. We often interpret a lack of response as rejection, when in reality the other person is simply distracted, experiencing problems, or prioritizing other issues. By reacting immediately with hurt, we reinforce the weight of this misperception. The Stoic practices pause. He gives the situation time to reveal its true nature before drawing definitive conclusions. There's also a psychological bias called negativity bias, which makes us pay more attention to what's negative or missing rather than what we already have. When we're ignored, we quickly forget the people who support us and focus all our energy on the one who silenced us. This mechanism is natural, but not inevitable. We can consciously shift our focus to those who value us, balancing the emotional scales. Stoic philosophy teaches that our suffering is rarely caused directly by events, but rather by how we interpret those events. Marcus Aurelius wrote that men are disturbed not by things, but by the opinions they hold about things. Indifference, when interpreted as something personal and definitive, becomes poison to the soul. But when seen as neutral or even irrelevant, it loses its power to harm us. One of the deepest roots of this pain lies in our attachment to the image we project. We create a version of ourselves that we want the world to see, and we expect everyone to recognize. When someone ignores us, we feel as if that image is being disregarded, and this threatens the narrative we've constructed about who we are. The Stoic, however, prefers to be authentic, even if it means not pleasing everyone, because they know that universal approval is impossible. Another factor that reinforces the impact of indifference is the habit of seeking comparisons. We observe how other people receive attention, how their words generate reactions, and then we measure our own worth by this yardstick. This habit creates a silent and exhausting competition. The Stoic understands that life is not a race for the spotlight, but a journey to remain true to one's principles, even when no one is watching. Understanding the root of pain also means accepting that we don't control other people's hearts. We can inspire, influence, and even move others, but we can't force them to notice or value us. When we internalize this, we stop living in constant expectation of answers and begin to live in the certainty that our actions have value in themselves. As we conclude this stage of understanding, it becomes clear that indifference is, in large part, a mirror. It reflects our expectations, fears, and the excessive importance we place on external perspective. From this understanding, we can move on to the next stage, learning to apply Stoic healing in practice, transforming the other's silence into fuel for our inner peace. If we've recognized the wound and understood its root, now is the time to act. The first Stoic practice when faced with indifference is the dichotomy of control. Repeat mentally, others' attention is not mine, my reaction is. By doing this, you separate what you can influence from what is beyond your reach. This simple division is liberating because it prevents your energy from being wasted trying to change what is uncontrollable. The moment you internalize this, you've already halved the emotional weight you carry. The second step is to cultivate internal observation before responding externally. When you feel the pain of being ignored, don't rush to react, respond, or justify yourself. Instead, take a conscious pause. Breathe deeply. Notice where the emotion manifests in your body, perhaps a tightness in your chest, tension in your shoulders, heat in your face, and allow it to exist without feeding it. This pause isn't passivity, it's an act of self-mastery, a choice not to be a slave to your first reaction. The third practice is to redirect your focus. Every time you realize you're wasting energy trying to be seen by someone who ignores you, ask yourself, what can I build now that doesn't depend on anyone else for its value? It could be a project, a habit, a study, or a self-care activity. The Stoic understands the time invested in seeking attention is time stolen from one's own growth. Every minute you give back to yourself is a silent victory. Another powerful exercise is intentional silence. This doesn't mean cutting off contact out of pride, but rather choosing not to engage in competitions for attention. When someone ignores you, don't respond with desperation or indirectness. Respond with composure. This silence, when sustained by inner tranquility, is not empty. It is full of meaning. It communicates without words that your peace is not for sale. It's also helpful to practice negative visualization, a technique used by the Stoics to strengthen resilience. Imagine for a few minutes that everyone around you decided to completely ignore you. How would you live? What would you do? This mental simulation prepares you to deal with real indifference in a more balanced way because it reduces the emotional shock when it occurs. You've already trained your spirit to Remain standing even without applause. A daily practice that helps solidify this attitude is to record, at the end of the day, an action you performed well that didn't depend on external recognition. It could be as simple as remaining calm in an argument, completing a task with excellence, or helping someone without expecting thanks. Over time, this habit changes the source of your satisfaction. It stops coming from outside and starts to originate within you. We can't forget the power of perspective. When you feel like you're suffering too much from being ignored, ask yourself, will this matter in 5 years or even in 5 days? This simple shift in scale reduces the intensity of the emotion and helps put the situation in perspective. Many of the pains that seem immense today appear small when viewed from a broader perspective. Finally, remember that true healing isn't about stopping the discomfort, but about preventing it from controlling your decisions. The pain of being ignored may knock on your door, but you decide whether it enters and settles in. By applying these practices, you transform each episode of indifference into a training ground to strengthen your character, until the day comes when the silence of others will be just a distant sound, incapable of shaking your core. An essential practice to neutralize the impact of indifference is learning to nurture your own presence. This means investing in yourself consistently enough that your self-esteem doesn't depend on a single external perspective. This could be developing a skill, cultivating a healthy habit, or even intentionally caring for your body and mind. When you stay focused on your own growth, the lack of attention loses its power because your validation comes from the progress you see daily. Another powerful exercise is the silent victory log. Every day, write down something you've accomplished without anyone noticing. It could be a thought you controlled before it turned into a harsh word, a healthy choice made in the midst of a stressful day, or a moment you decided not to lower yourself to get attention. These victories accumulated build an inner fortitude. A Stoic doesn't live waiting for applause. They silently applaud themselves for each battle they win against their own ego. It's also helpful to practice disciplined self-talk. When your mind starts repeating that being ignored is proof you don't matter, respond clearly. I matter because of who I am, not what I get. This reaffirmation acts as a counterbalance to negative self-talk. It's like correcting a navigator who keeps going down the wrong path. Each correction keeps it on the right track until it becomes automatic. Another practical point is learning to select emotional battles. Not every silence deserves interpretation, and not every indifference deserves a reaction. When you realize you're about to waste energy trying to be seen, ask yourself, does this serve my life purpose? If the answer is no, withdraw with dignity. This withdrawal isn't an escape, it's a strategy. You preserve your strength to invest where there's real possibility for growth and reciprocity. Stoic meditation is also a valuable tool. Set aside a few minutes each day to sit in silence and observe your thoughts without judging them. This develops the ability to disidentify with every emotion that arises, including the pain of being ignored. Gradually, you realize that feelings pass like clouds and that none of them define who you are. This emotional distance gives you the clarity to act with balance. Performing acts of kindness without witnesses is another effective practice. When you help someone without expecting others to know, or do something positive without publicizing it, you are, in effect, teaching your ego that it doesn't need an audience to be worthwhile. This habit builds genuine satisfaction, anchored in the act itself, not in subsequent recognition. It's also important to cultivate a circle of relationships based on values, not on the exchange of attention. When you surround yourself with people who share principles and respect your essence, the indifference of those outside that circle becomes unimportant. The Stoic doesn't seek to be liked by everyone, but rather to be respected by those whose opinions truly carry moral weight. Finally, it's important to celebrate the ability to wait. When you resist the temptation to force attention and allow your actions to speak over time, you develop patience as a core virtue. The world may ignore today, but it cannot erase consistent results. The Stoic doesn't plant to reap tomorrow. He plants so that the harvest is inevitable, whether or not it's visible to others. Another crucial point in applying Stoic healing is to transform silence into an ally. When you're ignored, you can use this space as an opportunity to listen more, observe more, and learn more. Instead of filling the lack of response with anxiety, fill it with awareness. How many things go unnoticed because we're too busy trying to be noticed? The Stoic knows that by paying attention to the world and to oneself, one finds lessons that couldn't emerge amidst the noise. Additionally, practice intentional emotional distancing. Imagine you're an outside observer, watching the scene of indifference as if it were a movie. What would you say to the main character? Often, by adopting this perspective, we realize we're overreacting or investing energy in something that doesn't deserve such weight. This exercise helps bring situations into proportion and avoid hasty decisions. It's also crucial to adopt the rule of not responding immediately to emotional stimuli. If you feel the urge to send an impulsive message, confront someone, or hastily justify yourself, wait. Give it at least a few hours or even a full day before acting. This delay creates a barrier between emotion and action, and often what seemed urgent loses its importance. After a while, another exercise is to set progress goals that don't depend on external factors. This could include daily reading, physical activity, writing, studying, or any activity that aligns with your values. By measuring your success by internal goals, you reduce the influence of fluctuating attention you receive from the world. The Stoic lives to keep his or her word, not to meet the expectations of others. It's equally important to practice conscious detachment. Recognize that in many cases, indifference isn't about you, it's about the other person, their limits, and their choices. Free yourself from the need for everyone to notice you, as that's impossible. By letting go of this demand, you open yourself to more authentic relationships, less based on silent demands. Also incorporate daily self-reflection into your practice. Ask yourself at the end of each day, did I need attention today to feel good? If the answer is yes, analyze where that need came from and how you could have acted differently. This constant analysis builds emotional autonomy and weakens the habit of seeking external validation. A more advanced exercise is to voluntarily expose yourself to small doses of indifference. This can be done by not announcing your achievements, not commenting on something you'd like to share, or not trying to confirm if anyone noticed your actions. It may feel uncomfortable at first, but over time it becomes liberating. It's like training an emotional muscle to not depend on external stimuli. Finally, remember that responding to indifference with serenity doesn't mean accepting disrespect. The Stoic maintains his dignity and, when necessary, sets clear boundaries. But these boundaries are established calmly and firmly, not with emotional outbursts. This stance sends a silent yet powerful message. You are in control of your peace, and it's not for sale for crumbs of attention. When we consistently apply Stoic practices in the face of indifference, something profound begins to change. At first, we notice small victories, an unanswered comment that no longer keeps us awake at night, a lack of attention that no longer causes the same lump in our throat. Over time, this resilience expands to other areas of our lives. We begin to act more on the intrinsic value of each action and less on the reaction it generates. It's as if our energy, previously scattered trying to win attention, is now fully directed toward building something solid and lasting. This transformation is also reflected in the way we relate to one another. We stop seeking superficial connections based on exchanges of attention and begin to value bonds sustained by respect and genuine affinity. Interestingly, when we stop chasing validation, it begins to emerge naturally. People notice the serenity, strength, and independence we cultivate and, paradoxically, begin to admire us more, not because we beg for it, but because we demonstrate self-sufficiency. Another striking effect is emotional freedom. We no longer react urgently to every silence, nor do we transform every lack of response into a crisis. This freedom allows us to use the time and energy previously spent on insecurities to advance projects, take care of ourselves, and deepen our knowledge. It's as if, by lifting an invisible weight from our shoulders, our path becomes lighter and firmer at the same time. The transformation also changes our relationship with the ego. The Stoic, who once needed to be seen to feel he existed, now finds meaning in his own actions. He understands that virtue needs no witnesses to exist, and that its value is neither greater nor lesser for being recognized. This distancing from the ego makes us more humble and at the same time more confident. It is no longer necessary to shout to prove who we are. Our conduct speaks for us. Another significant change is in how we react to provocations. Those who master the art of remaining calm in the face of indifference invariably become more resilient to unfair criticism, veiled insults, and emotional manipulation. The same self-control that prevents you from giving in to the desire to be noticed also protects you from acting impulsively when others try to destabilize you. A mind trained in silence is a fortress that cannot be shaken by the wind. This approach generates a powerful side effect: inspiration. People around you begin to notice that you don't let your need for approval control you, and they often seek advice or imitate your way of handling similar situations. Silent example is more powerful than long speeches. By showing that it's possible to live well without depending on the gaze of others, you open doors for others to do the same. Over time, this transformation becomes part of who you are. It's no longer a conscious effort to resist the pain of being ignored. It's simply natural. Emotions still arise, but you observe them like clouds passing through the sky. You acknowledge their presence, but know they won't stay. This serenity makes it clear that true power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering yourself. Ultimately, the journey shows that being ignored was never the central problem. The real challenge was always how you dealt with it. By understanding, accepting, and applying Stoic practices, you not only overcome the initial pain, but transform it into fuel to become stronger, freer, and more focused on what truly matters. And it's at this point that you discover the best response to indifference is to live in such a way that your value doesn't need to be explained. When you reach this stage, you begin to realize that other people's indifference is actually an excellent energy filter. Without having to dramatically cut ties, you naturally identify who truly cares and who is only there when there's something to gain. This no longer causes pain. On the contrary, it brings clarity. You stop wasting effort trying to win the attention of people who, deep down, don't want or are incapable of offering a real connection. This emotional economy is one of the greatest rewards of the Stoic path. Another aspect that changes is how you see yourself. Before, your self-image could fluctuate depending on the world's response. Now it's more stable, anchored in consistent values and practices. You no longer need applause to confirm you're on the right path. The metrics that matter are internal: discipline, integrity, resilience. And when this awareness is consolidated, life gains a sense of purpose far deeper than any fleeting approval could offer. The transformation also affects how you approach achievements. By no longer relying on external validation, you learn to savor victories silently, almost privately. Satisfaction comes not from public recognition, but from the internal knowledge that you did the right thing to the best of your ability. This shift creates a virtuous cycle. The more you act principled, the more your life is filled with meaningful accomplishments, even if the world never knows about them. At this point, patience becomes a natural virtue. You understand that everything in life takes time to mature, and that rushing for recognition is a sign of insecurity. By waiting for your actions to speak for themselves, you build a solid reputation based on consistency and coherence. This reputation, in turn, attracts opportunities and respect without you having to ask for it. It's like planting a tree. There's no way to accelerate its growth, but when the shadow appears, it lasts. The impact of this change goes beyond you. Your relationships become healthier because they're no longer just transactions for attention. Affection and respect begin to flow freely, without hidden demands. You engage in relationships by choice, not necessity. And this freedom is felt by the people around you, who begin to see you as a solid, trustworthy, and balanced presence. Over time, even your communication changes. You speak less to convince and more to share. Silence ceases to be uncomfortable and becomes a tool for presence. The lack of need to be noticed gives you space to listen more and observe better. This increases your perception of the world and strengthens your ability to make fair and thoughtful decisions. Ultimately, what Stoicism teaches on this journey is that life becomes lighter when we let go of the burden of expectations about how others should treat us. By releasing this burden, we make room for what truly matters: our own character, our choices, our inner commitments. And this is something no one can take away from us because it doesn't depend on any external gaze or word. And finally, we realize that indifference, once seen as an obstacle, can become an ally. It trains us toward autonomy, clarity, and focus on what's truly worthwhile. When we understand this, we not only become immune to the pain of being ignored, but we also gain the ability to transform any silence into fertile ground. For personal growth, at this stage, the question is no longer why did they ignore me, but what can I build while this is happening? As you complete this journey, it's impossible not to realize how much the silence of others has lost its power to control your emotions. What once seemed like a direct affront is now seen merely as a neutral event, which you decide whether or not to interpret. This conscious choice is true freedom, not to react automatically, but to respond in a way that aligns with your principles. This self-control is what differentiates those who live at the mercy of circumstances from those who live guided by a firm purpose. You also realize that by changing the way you deal with indifference, you've changed the way you deal with life. The same serenity that protects you from being shaken by an uninterested gaze helps you face bigger crises with poise. This transformation isn't just emotional, but practical. You become more productive, more attentive, and more capable of making decisions that truly matter because you don't waste energy trying to control the uncontrollable. Stoicism, at this point, ceases to be just a set of ideas and becomes part of your identity. It's like an invisible armor that weighs you down but is always present, ready to protect you from the small and large trials of everyday life. And with this armor, you can navigate any environment, from a room full of critical glances to absolute silence, with the same serene, firm, and unwavering posture. So if you're dealing with the pain of being ignored today, know that you don't need to react by trying to prove your worth. Instead, live in a way that your own character is the proof. Build something so solid that it doesn't need advertising, so true that it doesn't depend on applause, and so consistent that even in silence, it continues to grow. This is the Stoic victory. Not being seen by everyone, but being recognized by yourself as someone who lived according to a virtue. Perhaps by listening to me this far, you've realized that indifference never had the power it seemed to. What hurt was giving it control over your reactions. Now you know you can choose to maintain your peace, even when the world goes silent. Tell me in the comments if you've ever experienced something like this and what you learned from it. Your story might be just what someone, right now, needs to read to find strength. If this reflection resonated with you, share it with anyone who might benefit from it today. And if you'd like to continue reflecting with me on how to keep your mind steady and your heart serene, subscribe, and let's continue this journey together. Because in the end, it's not the silence of others that defines your worth. It's what you decide to build while it happens.